Hi guys, welcome back to the channel. Really good to have you along today. I'm talking about self-defense and whether or not it's right, or whether or not we take the right approach when we're trying to market like the likes of Kendo or Iaido or Aikido even as valid for practical self-defense, right? So you often see these sort of, like a post or a flyer, post on social media or a flyer, and it will have like reasons for doing Kendo, starting Kendo. For example, I'm going to use Kendo as the main example because otherwise I have to just keep repeating myself. Anyway, and it'll say things like discipline, self-defense, courtesy. It'll start listing off some of the virtues of practicing Budo. And self-defense being on there, so this happened recently. Imafuji Sensei, Masato Imafuji Sensei from kendoguide.com posted on Facebook, and he had the sort of layout. It was the second one on the list, self-defense. And I thought that's maybe like a bit of a misrepresentation. So what I said was I didn't think he was wrong, and I didn't say that. Certainly not trying to be rude, and I'll elaborate on this. We didn't get into a disagreement or a Barney or anything. We had actually a really good discussion on it, and I hope to get him on the channel at some point, and possibly even Alex Bennett Sensei as well, because I think this has ties with the historical progression of our martial arts as well, and it would be great to discuss it in detail. But it was my feeling that if you've got beginners coming along and they see a post like that, it's basically an advertisement. So it's like you're a company and you're selling a product. These are the features of the product. Okay, so if somebody comes along and they then buy into that and they don't get it, they should be able to hold you account for that. If it was a product, that they would be able to hold you to account for that. And if martial arts were like really closely regulated, that would be a thing, right? That would become a thing. So this boils down to my own personal opinion, so please don't shoot me down, okay? Just so you know, Imafuji Sensei and I came to a mutual understanding, and actually we were in very close agreement once we hashed it out through some messages about, what do you actually mean when you say this, and what do we think this actually means when we say it? And here's how it breaks down. So my view is, as I said, don't misrepresent Kendo by selling it as something it's not. So you could certainly say that it encompasses self-defense principles, but I don't think you can market it on a practical level for self-defense. And there was a guy who was in the comments who really got offended by this, and he was like, because the comment I actually left that started all of this was that I said, I'm surprised to see self-defense on the list. And I have a friend who runs a self-defense course, I guess, or coaching business called Defense Unlimited, I believe it is. I'll try and link it here if I can. And he's actually one of my original dojo mates from South Africa, Warren Ho. Lovely guy, great kendoka, and he's been a self-defense professional for many years now. He actually liked my comment because I said, I'm surprised to see self-defense so high on the list, basically. And then a bunch of people joined in. And one of the guys who left a comment said, well, it was something like, well, there's a reason why the police officers in Tokyo do Kendo. And I was like, I didn't really bite at this at the time, because I didn't want it to turn nasty or anything, but that's not the reason the police officers in Japan do Kendo. It's not for self-defense purposes. That there is a culture of prestige that goes with the tokuren, right? And I'm not saying that they don't learn practical skills from Kendo, like say if you're in the riot squad, it make you better at knocking people the hell out with a nightstick. Yeah, I'm sure that's a thing. But there's a lot of other factors to take into consideration in that situation, right? And I'll get down to it, okay? But the point is, and this is where I'm going to start the discussion so that it stays coherent. Here's where I'm coming from, okay? In the modern world, particularly if you live in a violent country, so I come from South Africa, Johannesburg, South Africa, it's one of the most violent places in the world. I'm sure people who live in like Sao Paulo in Brazil would probably have the same mentality, or if they lived in New York. And even guys in London, right? There's a bad knife crime problem in London. Plenty of muggings and things like that. Any major city has these issues to deal with. Yeah, the concerns for self-defense are very, very practical. So in other words, when they see a flyer that says you're going to learn self-defense, they expect self-defense, and they expect it not in 10 years' time. They expect it right off the bat. Okay, that doesn't mean that they're reasonably going to expect to be a complete badass in 6 months, but maybe they expect to be a little bit more capable against like a school bully in 6 months. But I think it's reasonable for them to expect that within a year or two, they'll be far more competent in a real violent altercation than without training. Okay? And so this is where we get into it. Okay? Kendo, in particular, and this goes for EI, it goes for Aikido, less so for karate. Karate, I think, is much more practical, and certainly jiu-jitsu as well. And I mean the Japanese variant, not just the Brazilian variant. It goes for judo as well. But Kendo has a few problems when it comes down to that, from that interpretation of what do you mean by we're going to learn self-defense, right? Okay, so let's break it down. Let's get into why I say that. So the first thing is, when we train a martial art, there's a certain way that we stand, a certain way that we move our body, the way we do our footwork, the way we position ourselves. And it's relevant usually to the type of tools or weapons we're going to employ. So in our case, we're talking about cutting or thrusting with a two-handed sword of a certain length and design, okay? Namely the katana, or you could say the touchy. Yeah, in the case of the shinai, it's a bit longer. In the case of the Bokto, it's katana, right? We also have this issue that you have to remember that what the purpose is of your martial art that you practice. And here's where things get twisted by a lot of people, that they misunderstand the purpose of the martial art. And I'm not saying Imafuji Sensei has done this, not at all. He's a very established, really good kendoka and teacher and coach and sensei to many. And he's been doing it for 40 years. I'm just coming up on 20. His experience dwarfs mine completely. I'm sure I can learn a lot about Kendo and Budo and everything from him. But the point is that you're practicing for a very specific set of circumstances. Okay, so when we're practicing Kendo, what are we doing? We're trying to strike specific parts of the bogu, for instance. So we've got to meet the criteria of Yukoda Tatsu, right? So we've got to strike the correct zone on the armor. We have to strike it with the correct angle of the blade. We have to have good posture. We have to create a good opportunity. All these things, okay? And on the face of it, you go, well, like, isn't that what you got to do in a fight? Yeah, sort of, yeah, okay, but it's a very small part of what wins a real fight. Somebody who's being genuinely violent and aggressive against you isn't really going to care if they hit you perfectly, okay? Another thing to consider is that, like, even if you were in a real sword fight, like the way that we do our keiko, you got to remember it's consensual. So you're there to train your techniques and learn to apply the principles that your sensei has taught you. And your partner's there to do that as well. Your partner isn't actually fighting you. They're just doing their thing and you're doing your thing and you're mutually testing together. And even in Shiai, it's still not violent. Okay, even though there's more of an emphasis on don't give away a point and, get points before they do, right? Get your ippon and try not to lose ippon. And sometimes there's some funny tactics that come in, obviously, like when time's running out and, some people can get a bit sporty with it. Or I'll just push them up the Shaijo or, try and sort of time waste in Super Sariai, these things. The point is that I'm getting to is that things that happen inside Kendo that are just not relevant in a real fight. And one of them is like, so Imafuji Sensei and I talked about this, was Super Sariai. If you've watched like Tokura and the Police Shiai, you'll see sometimes the sweep trips. Okay, this is a bit more practical, but it's not the only answer to this question. But what happens when you don't get the perfect strike, right? Many times, maybe it hits their shinai and it just bounces off, and there's no strike at all. Fine, okay. But a lot of cases, it strikes the bogu roughly in the right place, but it's just not good enough for ippon. That's not acknowledged. But in a real fight, that is going to be acknowledged, right? If you've done enough to cut them and hurt them badly, you've cut them and you've hurt them badly, and that has real consequences. Okay, so there's that practical level of it. We get incidental strikes. You get into super sari-ai and the shinai is like rubbing on their shoulder here, or it's set right by their neck. Okay, so in reality, if you got into a situation like that, I mean, you would just take a little like that, and the fight's over. Okay, that's the reality of it. We ignore that, so we choose to ignore accidental strikes and incidental strikes because that's not the point. The point in Kendo is not to fight. The point in Kendo is going after the set of principles and trying to attain it. It's more about the process that you go through every day with that type of training, that difficult, challenging, mentally challenging, physically challenging training, and how you deal with your failures in life, how you overcome obstacles, your ability to be patient, your ability to keep your concentration up. That all develops your character when you expose yourself voluntarily to that week in and week out, or day in and day out, or several times a day, every week, which is the Budo lifestyle. Okay, and it's about what you gain as a person from the pursuit of quite a narrow set of principles. Okay, quite a lofty set of principles as well. Whereas in an everyday fight, it's kill that guy before they kill you. Right? It doesn't have to be pretty. Just get the job done. Okay, or you will die. So that's the first set of practicalities that I think is very different, and why it's not immediately obvious to a beginner how they're going to get any benefit for self-defense. But if you tell them they will, they'll sign up. Okay, and so you need to be careful. So second point is down to the actual techniques, because everyone likes to talk about this. Oh, I'll do this and then I'll do that, and then and it's rubbish. It's lots of rubbish. Okay. So think about what we do. We stand a certain way. We carry our feet a certain way. We move our feet a certain way. It's all set up for the specific weapon in our hands, which is a shinai or bokuto or Iaido or shinken. Depending on the art you do, whether it's Iaido, Kendo, or even if you're like, in my head, the shinai is a sword, and like you really believe that when you're doing your keiko. I don't care. You've got, there's certain ways that we stand that make sense with the way the weapon is used. It's held with two hands. It's a certain length, so it means that to thrust effectively, you have to, move your body in a certain way. Rather than standing side on, for example, the sword is probably a bit too heavy and inaccurate to control for thrusts that way. And it's not great for stabilization of cuts and things like that. There are practical reasons for why we stand the way we do. And they have nothing to do with hand-to-hand combat out in the streets. And so you need to ask yourself, well, where is it relevant? Because you're not carrying your sword, right? Just in general public. You're not, you make the argument, hey, well, it could be while I'm on my way to the dojo, or back from the dojo, or to the taikai, or whatever. Yeah, that could be the case, but where is your weapon? It's in a bag, most likely. I don't know what it's like in certain territories, like maybe in some of the states in America, maybe the laws are different to here, but I think for most countries, it's kind of similar in that if you're a licensed user or you have sort of, insurance for that weapon, you can carry it, but it needs to be concealed. So it needs to be in a bag or a case or something like that, and it generally stays out of sight as much as possible. That's something to think about, because the practicality means that when the guy, whoever your assailant is, gets close enough that you now understand you are in a violent confrontation and they're going to hurt you unless you do something about it. Yeah, so that's the definition really of self-defense. Like, you are sure this has become a violent situation, and unless you respond in kind with some kind of violence of your own, it's not going to de-escalate. In that time, are you going to have time to like, hang on, let me just unzip my weapons bag and get my Iaido or my Bokto or my, whatever it is out? That isn't going to happen. Okay, it's just not on the cards. The fight will be finished by the time you do that, and it won't be in your favor. Then there's the practicality of when you take, so now that you accept that you cannot use your sword, as it was highly unlikely, really tiny percentage of circumstances where you may be able to bring that to bear, you take that out of the equation, your footwork is not right for hand-to-hand combat, not in the slightest. Your your footwork, your body weight distribution, the way you move your feet is no longer efficient. You're not set up for punches and kicks. You're not set up for clinching. You're not set up for wrestling. You're not set up for any of those. And they're all really high percentage things that actually do happen in real life hand-to-hand combat situations, or even, you could say in a small percentage of situations with maybe somebody might have a small knife, something concealable or something like that. And then that would be my next point. Oh, well, what do you do if they've got a knife? Usually in self-defense, it's not recommended that you run because they could well be faster than you, or maybe you'll trip over something, or you don't know where you're running to, or if you'll actually be able to get away. But if it's, between you and a knife, you're going to get cut or stabbed with it. There's no doubt you'll at the very least, you're going to get cut badly, because the knife is just, it's a great weapon. It may well, in that situation, be better for you to run. And it's the same if there's like loads of them, loads of people, loads of assailants, and they outnumber you. Maybe you're better off to run. There's a great YouTube channel that covers that sort of practicalities. It's a self-defense coach out of the States. His name's Icy Mike. He runs a channel called Hard to Hurt. And just be aware that when you visit the channel, I'll link it above. He does take the mick out of other YouTubers, martial arts YouTubers and coaches. It's nothing personal. He has a go at everybody, because there's usually something about the way most systems are kind of taught or misrepresented, and it's a good opportunity for a YouTube video. But he is actually a nice guy, and he does communicate with the wider martial arts community. But go over and check out his channel. It's great for self-defense. He comes at combat sports training, but much more from a self-defense perspective. But he also talks about weapons and the domestic situation with like improvised weapons and things like that. So well worth a look. But just remember, don't take it to heart. Don't take it personally if you like pokes fun at your martial art or something. Okay, it's not personal. Where was I? So anyway, yeah, the reality is you're not trained like we train for, muscle memory in the way that we move, and you haven't trained the muscle memory for moving, to guard yourself like from punches and kicks, or to deal with somebody who's like, brings your head down in a clinch, or they grab both your legs or one of your legs and like barrel into it, and to basically take you down to the ground, like a rugby tackle, right? Rugby tackle is basically a single leg or a double leg takedown. That's what it is, right? Straight out of the wrestling playbook. We don't practice any of that. It's not part of our muscle memory, okay? And your reply to that might be, well, yeah, but we practice the principles of that. Okay, how long did it take you before you could reliably apply those principles to the point where you're like, I can do this against 80% or more of the people that I come across? In Kendo, my experience is that most people are only starting to... So let's talk about the principles, right? The principles that are valuable. The reasons why you can say Kendo has got self-defense value to some extent, right? And this is why I said Imafuji Sensei is not wrong when he says this. It's just the order of priority or the emphasis that you put on it. I think you need to be careful how much you do that. But let's take, for example, Zanshin. Many people would bring up Zanshin. Zanshin is a great one, right? And this ties in with the concept of kigamai, right? So the readiness of the spirit, okay, and alertness. Obviously, being aware of the situation around you, what's going on, who's approaching you, how close they are, all of that kind of thing. And it's, the idea that maybe you've got into a tussle and it's become a fight, and so you've hit the guy and he's gone down, or whatever. Keep your eyes open. Like, don't just assume like that's a done and dusted. All those things, right? Zanshin, we all know it. Of course, it's valuable. It's a valuable principle. It's not unique to Kendo though. That's a universal principle of all martial arts. Okay, if it isn't, like, that martial arts fake. Okay, that's a good way to spot fake. If they don't teach you that, it's not going to be called Zanshin, but the principle is going to be the same, right? Uh, Taking the sen, right? Taking the initiative. Application of pressure. Like, how do you pressure an opponent? How do you create opportunities? And as I say, like, how do you control the timing, which is taking the initiative? Yes, incredibly valuable, and they are practicable in Kendo. You can directly apply them against opponents, and that's where Kendo is like better than some martial arts, because we do have a form of sparring and different levels of pressure testing to learn to apply those things. And what was the last one? I can't remember. It doesn't matter. Okay, we could go on into a few more. Oh yeah, it was shikai, which is like kind of how to like spot the point of vulnerability in the opponent. Like, you create a doubt, a hesitation, fear, surprise. Those sorts of things. Like, so how do you create it and like see it in your opponent? So you recognize the time to strike. Um, Yes, they're all very important. They're not unique to Kendo. They're not unique to Japanese martial arts. They're universal principles. That's why they're held so dear. That's why people read the Book of Five Rings like all around the world, and it's taught in military academies and all that kind of thing. Okay, uh, that's great. But in my experience, and I think most very high level teachers, like seventh, sixth, seventh, eighth dan, would agree with me when I say this, that it tends to be from around, if the person is getting it quite quickly in Kendo, it's usually around third dan where they start to see glimmers of starting to get that sort of stuff. Like, they see like the emergence of like uh, the ability to semi and take the initiative and stuff like that. And usually that comes a bit later. Like basic semi is maybe around third dan. Basic sen is maybe fourth dan. Sometimes it's higher. Sometimes it takes people a bit longer to get sen. Um, because like you can start a bit tricksy, if that makes sense. It's a trick. Like, this is a set routine I do. I do this and then I do this, and they fall for it every time. Haha. That's not real semi. That's like the beginnings. That's like you're dipping your toe in the water, because as soon as that opponent's like, I've seen that combination 1,000 times, they'll be much harder to break. So it's not genuine. You haven't really broken them. It's a bit about them making a mistake, not so much about you being great. So my point is, it's usually like it takes like, if you're lucky, third dan, fourth dan, before you're really starting to get into that stuff and have some degree of control of being able to apply it. And having like true control of the opponent actually happens much later. You know what I mean? It's like you have to acknowledge that as people who are like usually like fifth dan or above, and maybe even in those cases, I'm not aware. Like, I haven't reached that level yet, so I don't know how confident they feel about being able to control other people. It might be sixth dan or above, or even seventh dan or above. I don't know. I'm sure you would hear different things from different teachers. Um, but the point is, how long does it take you to get to that? It could take you 10 years to get to third dan. It could take you 15 years to get to fourth dan, and so on and so forth. People, when they read that flyer and they see self-defense as the second thing on the list, they don't want to see in parentheses, uh, self-defense skills valid in 10 or 15 years, depending on your ability to absorb and apply it. That's not what they want to see. They want to see, like, I'm paying for a service, and what am I going to get for the service? And that's why I'm saying we need to be careful. Okay. Now, you might say, wait, okay, but that's the same with all martial arts. No, I don't. I don't agree with that. I don't agree with that in the slightest. And I'll give you some examples as to why I say that. Because there are martial arts that are much more, and some of them you might go, well, that's a sport, but it's still a martial art in its own right. They're much more focused on what are called high yield techniques and they probably have, in some cases, they have much fewer of them. So they're not, basically, you don't get tied up in technique for as long. Um, and you can still spend your whole life pursuing it. You can still get the discipline side of it and courtesy in some cases, not all of them, because some of them are more sportified. But essentially, let's take boxing for example. Boxing, if you look at the amount of self-defense situations, by now I'll have probably put up some videos, some altercations. The amount of times you hear stories of like old guys, you know, a veteran knocks out mugger or whatever it is, right? And the guy's like late 60s, 70s, maybe even 80s, right? But he used to be like a boxer when he was younger, and he knocks out like this young hooligan, right? Mugger or whatever it is. And usually, whatever you see him drop the young guy with is really simple. You know, jab, jab, straight, and the person goes down. And it works really well, okay? High percentage techniques. That's what I mean by them, rather than some convoluted thing of, oh, he's going to come at me like this, so I'm going to get him in this complicated wrist lock and throw him this way, and he's just going to let me. Okay, that's why Aikido has come under fire, because Aikido is like, it does have practical, valuable things to offer. So if you watch Ramsey Dewey, who runs JX Fight Club, I believe it's called, or it used to be that, I think. I think he moved gyms or changed the name of the gym. I'm not sure. Anyway, the point is he's an MMA coach based in Shanghai, China, and he does great videos debunking bad self-defense videos that are like commonly just thrown around like they'll work. But quite commonly in the MMA community, like Aikido, people like tear it to bits because they're like they don't pressure test. The stuff is too convoluted. It's not going to work when you're really putting pressure on. And there's very few people, it seems, in the Aikido community who can come back and show anything that will convince them that it is otherwise. And there's a reason for that, and it's probably because they don't spar. But Ramsey Dewey was saying on his channel actually that he's got an Aikidoka that trains with him, that once he learned to fight, i.e. he did sparring where he was fighting, and he acquired the other skills that he needed to be able to deal with a range of different opponents, then he was able to apply his Aikido within that. So he was able to bring in some of those locks into, but also paired with like Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu skills or wrestling skills to get him to the position where he could have the time and space to employ said lock, and successfully submitted many opponents using Aikido techniques. So it does exist. Sorry if you heard a notification there, it's just on my phone. Yeah, so there is a practical side to those traditional martial arts, but the question is, where's the focus been placed? Our martial arts have evolved, okay, and they've evolved in a way where they've become very like educational pursuits and pursuits for the betterment of character, and less focus on the martial side. Then there's modern sports and martial arts where there's still, or on purpose, more focus on the martial side and a little bit less focus on the art side. And so, for example, like if somebody approached me and they were like, "What do I do for self-defense?" I mean, like I've listened to the experts, and my opinion based on what I've heard is I think you do well to do a striking art and a clinch art and a ground art, or at least the ground art and a striking art. Probably boxing is a really good one because it's really high percentage techniques. There's not very many of them, and you learn positioning really well in it. The techniques that you are going to use, like I said, they're high yield. They're going to end fights quickly, and that's ultimately what you want to do. If you get really pushed into a corner, you want to end things as fast as possible. And then, maybe a good submission art like Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, like, again, it stops fights. Or, wrestling or judo, like the art of like getting people to the ground or staying off the ground. They teach both things, and they're great for positioning as well. Those are the ones I would recommend for on a practical level. And like I said, just to sum this up, I'm not saying that there is no self-defense value to Budo, Aikido, Kendo, Iaido, any of these things. The concepts are there, but we are not focused on fighting. yeah, we're doing something different. Remember that our purpose is different now. And I think we just need to be careful on how we sell our arts, because at the end of the day, if we missell it, those people are going to leave anyway. You haven't achieved anything by kind of stretching your art to make it more appealing to what you think they want. You haven't achieved anything. They're just going to leave anyway when they figure out that, oh, this is a lot of repetition and it's like highly situational, and it's not even written in the purpose of the art that that's what we're here to do. We're not here to fight. I need something here that teaches me what to do in a fight. And remember that people can do more than one martial art. You know, there's no reason why the guy can't go down to the local MMA club or Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu club and then come to Kendo once or twice a week. That's absolutely fine. I have students like that where their father is I believe, a Jiu-Jitsu coach, and the kids do a bit of Jiu-Jitsu and they come down to Kendo, and they really respect what we do and how we do it, because we don't dress it up to be something that it isn't. You know, but at the same time, it is a really cracking cool martial art, because it's pretty feisty. Yeah, it gets pretty close to being a proper combative art or combat sport without actually needing to go down that road, without the showboating and the gloating and the bad language and the suspect characters that sometimes turn up. I mean, Kendo has its own suspect characters from time to time, but generally it's a pretty good place to have your kids come, you know, for martial arts. But at the same time, they're not going to just get a high rank because everybody's a winner at Kendo. That's another reason why MMA people like Kendo. Anyway, I'm going to leave it there. I hope you've enjoyed it. I hope I haven't ruffled everyone's feathers completely to the point where they hate me now. And, you know, I'd love to know your thoughts. You know, drop me a comment and you know, what do you think? What do you think? Should we be pushing Kendo as a self-defense thing, or do you think we need to be careful about how we say that, lest people get the wrong idea and ultimately end up losing them as a result? It's an interesting question. I don't think there's 100% right answer, and this is just my opinion. And I hope one day in the future I'll have Imafuji Sensei and maybe Alex Bennett Sensei, as I said, on the channel. We can climb into the history of how Kendo and probably EI as well, you know, how they progressed through the ages and became a little less focused on the martial and a bit more focused on the art, and whether or not there is a need for that to change in the future and how they see that change going in the future, if indeed it comes. Because I think it'd be a really interesting discussion, and certainly those two, particularly Bennett Sensei, have the historical knowledge to really climb into that and show us the trajectory, to make it obvious. Because if you want to know where you're going, it helps to know where you've come from sometimes. So yeah, but all for the future, I hope. Until then, have a great day, and I'll see you next time. Cheers.